On the morning of the 8th of March, 1702, attendants at Kensington Palace undressed the body of a king. They found, tied to his left arm with a black ribbon, a lock of golden hair and a gold wedding ring. He had worn them there, hidden beneath his shirt, for nearly 8 years. The hair belonged to his wife, Mary II, who had died in a bedchamber just down the corridor. Most visitors today see Kensington Palace as a cheerful royal museum of painted ceilings and manicured gardens. But behind its red brick walls lies a darker 300-year pattern. This is the residence where kings went to die and where queens went to suffer. Chapter 1. The King Who Could Not Breathe. In the summer of 1689, a newly crowned king made a desperate 20,000-pound decision to save his own lungs. His name was William III. He was 40 years old, thin to the point of gauntness, with a hooked Dutch nose and a soft voice that rarely rose above a murmur. He had been king for less than 6 months. Already, the city of London was trying to kill him. The problem was Whitehall Palace. That vast royal warren of more than 1,500 rooms sat directly on the Thames. In the warm months, the river stank of sewage and tidal mud. In the cold months, a thick yellow fog rolled off the water and pressed itself against every window. For a man with chronic asthma, it was a slow execution. William had carried weak lungs since childhood. Doctors in The Hague had listened to him wheeze through the night for decades. He coughed into his sleeve during state business. He could not sleep lying flat. On the worst evenings, he sat propped upright in a chair, fighting for each breath, while his young wife Mary read quietly beside him. London was finishing what Holland had only started. So William did what a king could do. He looked for higher ground. 2 miles west of Whitehall, in a village called Kensington, there stood a modest Jacobean mansion owned by Daniel Finch, the 2nd Earl of Nottingham. Finch had built it for himself. It was a comfortable 3-story house of red brick, with a small park, clean gravel paths, and air that smelled of lavender instead of the river. It was not a palace. It was barely a country seat, but it sat on a gentle rise, above the fog line, and the wind came clean across the fields from the west. William offered Finch £20,000. In the money of the day, this was a considerable sum. A skilled craftsman earned perhaps £30 in a year. A country gentleman could live comfortably on 300. The king was spending the lifetime wages of hundreds of working men on a single house he intended to breathe in. Finch accepted. The deed was signed in June of 1689. Nottingham House became, quietly, the property of the crown. To understand why a king could move so fast and spend so freely, you have to understand what had happened in England the year before. In the autumn of 1688, William had landed at Brixham in Devon with a Dutch army of some 40,000 men. His Catholic father-in-law, James II, had fled to France. Parliament had offered the throne jointly to William and to his wife Mary, James's Protestant daughter. History would call this the Glorious Revolution. It had been neither quick nor simple. There were riots in the streets of London. There were Catholic fears and Protestant rumors. There were pamphlets and prayers and the slow turning of powerful men. By February of 1689, William and Mary sat crowned at Westminster Abbey. By summer, William could not breathe in his own capital. Mary understood. She was 26, tall, quick to laugh, and in her own way, just as frightened as her husband. She had agreed to rule jointly with him. She had watched her father driven from the kingdom. She had not chosen any of this. Now she walked with William through the rooms of Nottingham House and imagined what it could become: a refuge, a private place, a home. What neither of them could have known was the deeper truth of the house they had just bought. It had been acquired in haste, for one man's lungs, in one unusually warm summer, in the first panicked year of a new reign. It was meant as a remedy, but Kensington had its own quiet disposition. It was small, it was secluded. It sat at the edge of London like a held breath. And over the 3 centuries that followed, it would prove strangely skilled at one particular task. It would take people in, and it would not give them back the same. A house bought to let a king breathe would, in time, take the breath from almost everyone placed inside it. Chapter 2. A Palace Built in 6 Months. Sir Christopher Wren was given an impossible deadline, and the wall that fell proved that haste at Kensington always came with a cost. The king wanted his new home finished by Christmas. He had bought Nottingham House in June. That left Wren, the most celebrated architect in England, roughly 6 months to transform a private country mansion into a working royal palace. It was not enough time. Everyone involved knew it was not enough time. They started anyway. Wren was already 56 years old, a small, neat man with gray curls and careful hands. He had rebuilt much of London after the Great Fire. He was halfway through St. Paul's Cathedral. He had no shortage of other work. But when a king asked, an architect answered. Wren arrived at Kensington in late June of 1689 and began walking the grounds with his young assistant, a 22-year-old draftsman named Nicholas Hawksmoor. The plan they settled on was pragmatic. They would leave the modest Jacobean core of Finch's old mansion standing in the center. Around its 4 corners, they would wrap 4 new pavilions, each 3 stories high, each of red brick to match the original. The result would not be a grand continental palace. It would be a cluster of English country houses, stitched together, discreet and domestic. William liked that. He did not want Versailles. He wanted a home that happened to house a king. Work began immediately. Hundreds of laborers were hired from the villages around Kensington. Brick kilns ran night and day. Timber was carted in from the Thames wharves. The cost ran past the original £20,000 and kept climbing. By autumn, the estimate had doubled. By the time everything was truly finished, it would reach £60,000, 3 times the original budget. None of that mattered as much as the speed. The king's asthma did not wait for careful building. Queen Mary came out to inspect progress several times that autumn. She had grown up in grand houses. She knew what a building site felt like. She walked through the scaffolding in good boots, listening to the rap of hammers, smelling the fresh lime mortar, asking polite questions of the foreman. On one such visit, in November of 1689, she finished her tour, thanked the workmen, and climbed back into her carriage to return to Whitehall. Minutes after she left, a wall collapsed. The details, recorded in the household papers, are plain. A section of new brickwork, too freshly laid, too quickly loaded with the timbers above, gave way without warning. A workman beneath it was crushed. He died there in the dust. Other men around him were hurt, though the records do not name them all. Mary heard the news that evening. She wrote about it in a letter that survives in the royal archives. She did not describe the accident in practical terms. She described it as a sign. She wrote of the hand of God, reaching down to remind a sovereign of the cost of pride and haste. The queen was a devout woman. She saw in the fallen wall and the dead workman a warning addressed to her own house. It is a chilling document to read now. The first death at Kensington Palace came before the palace was finished. The building had not yet housed a single royal knight, and already it had taken a life. The work went on. Wren tightened his supervision. Hawksmoor drew and redrew details through the short winter days. By December, the state apartments were habitable, if not complete. Painters climbed scaffolds to finish ceilings. Joiners fitted paneling by candlelight. Gilders laid thin leaves of gold onto molding that was still slightly damp. On Christmas Eve of 1689, William and Mary moved in. Picture that arrival. The carriage rolling up the gravel drive in the late afternoon dusk. The breath of the horses hanging white in the cold air. Torches along the entrance. Servants lined up to bow. The king stepping down with his quiet wheeze. The queen beside him in her fur-lined cloak. Behind them, the red brick of the new pavilions glowed in the lantern light, freshly painted, freshly pointed. Inside, fires burned in every marble hearth. It looked, on that first evening, like a triumph. A palace raised in 6 months, a refuge secured, a new reign settled into its private walls. But somewhere beneath the fresh plaster, pressed into the cold mortar of a rebuilt wall, was the memory of a workman who had come to Kensington to earn his wages and had never gone home. The house had already begun its work. Chapter 3: The Lock of Hair Beneath His Sleeve. Smallpox came to Kensington in December 1694, and a queen of 32 sat up in bed burning her own letters. Mary had been ill for several days before anyone named the disease. At first, they thought it was a cold. She had a fever, a rash across her shoulders, a weariness that would not lift. She kept working, reading state papers, writing to her sister Anne, walking for a little each afternoon in the gardens. Then on the night of the 20th of December, the rash darkened. Red spots turned purple. Blood seeped beneath the skin of her arms and chest. The physicians recognized it at once. Hemorrhagic smallpox. It's the worst form of the disease, almost always fatal. Mary did not panic. This was the detail that struck every witness in the following days. She did not weep. She did not call out. She asked her ladies to bring her private correspondence to the bedside. She asked for a small brass fire dish, and she began to burn her letters. Letter by letter, she fed the papers to the flames. Love notes from William, girlhood letters from her sister, private reflections on her father, the deposed king, living now in exile in France. Prayers, confessions, anything that might embarrass the memory of a queen after her death. The smoke drifted through the hangings of the bed. The small fire crackled. Mary read each page once more before she let it go. She did one other thing that week. She gave strict instructions that no one who had not already survived smallpox was to come near her. She knew how it spread. She would not carry anyone else into her sickness. This order applied to her attendants. It applied to her friends, and it applied to her sister. Anne arrived at the palace gate. She was pregnant, as she so often was. She had never had smallpox. She begged to be allowed upstairs. The doors were closed against her. Mary would not risk the life of the child Anne carried. Anne stood in the cold corridor and wept. The two sisters, who had quarreled for years over money and over favorites, would not speak again. William was a different matter. He had survived smallpox as a boy. He was permitted to stay. He moved a small camp bed into Mary's room. He refused to leave it. For 6 nights, he sat by her, or slept in the bed beside hers, listening to the slow, harsh rattle of her breathing. Courtiers who entered found him changed. The cold, controlled Dutch king had gone. In his place was a man who could not stop crying. He collapsed more than once. Archbishop Tennyson wrote that the king's grief was such that those around him feared for his reason. Mary died on the 28th of December, 1694. She was 32 years old. William did not recover. He was a widower for 7 years and 3 months, and every one of those years showed. He grew thinner. He coughed more. He stopped laughing, which he had not done often in any case. He kept a small miniature of Mary on his person at all times. And though no one in his household knew it then, he began to wear something else. Tied to his left arm, with a black silk ribbon, impressed flat against his skin beneath his shirt sleeve, was a lock of Mary's hair. Looped through the same ribbon was her gold wedding ring. He wore them every day, through state councils, through military campaigns in Flanders, through audiences and dinners and long hours of paperwork at his desk at Kensington. Nobody saw. Nobody was meant to. He ruled alone for 7 more years. The grief did not soften. It simply folded itself into him and became part of how he breathed. In late February of 1702, William was riding in the park at Hampton Court on a horse called Sorrel. The horse stumbled in a mole hole. William was thrown and broke his collarbone. The injury itself should not have killed him, but a chill set in. The chill became pneumonia. Within days, the thin, asthmatic king was struggling for breath in the same way he had as a child. He was carried back to Kensington. The room in which Mary had died was just down the corridor. He did not ask to be moved elsewhere. Perhaps he wanted to be close to her. Perhaps the house had simply done what it did. William died on the 8th of March, 1702. He was 51. When his attendants undressed the body for the last time, they loosened his left sleeve and found what he had carried hidden for nearly 8 years. The lock of golden hair, the gold ring, the black ribbon that held them both. In the Jacobite taverns across the Thames, the king's political enemies raised their glasses that week in an ugly little toast. To the little gentleman in the black velvet waistcoat, they meant the mole whose heel had tripped the horse. They thought it was funny. Kensington, which had been bought to let a king breathe, had now watched 2 of them die. It was only beginning. Chapter 4. 17 children, not one survivor. Queen Anne walked its corridors mourning 17 children, and the palace walls absorbed every one of those small, private griefs. Anne came to Kensington in the spring of 1702, weeks after William's burial. She was 37 years old. She was her sister Mary's only surviving sibling, and now the last Protestant Stuart left on the throne. She walked with a slow, painful limp. Her joints were swollen with gout, her ankles thick, her hands so stiff in bad weather that she could barely hold a pen. She weighed by the end of her life so much that she had to be carried from room to room in a specially built chair. She had one husband, Prince George of Denmark, a kind, dull, beer-loving man whom she loved without reservation. And she had, over the course of her marriage, been pregnant 17 times. 17. The number is so difficult to hold in the mind that it slides away from the listener at first hearing. It needs to be slowed down. 7 miscarriages, most of them in the early months, some of them further along. 5 children stillborn. 4 children who drew breath and lived briefly. And 1 small, bright boy named William Duke of Gloucester, who lived to the age of 11, and who was the hope of the entire Protestant succession until a fever took him in 1700. Not one of those 17 children survived their mother. Anne came to Kensington carrying all of them in her memory. The palace took her in, and it let her mourn in the particular way the building allowed, quietly, privately, behind closed doors. No grand public ceremonies of grief, just long afternoons in her private apartments, with George beside her and her ladies reading aloud. Wren, still the king's surveyor, adjusted the house for her. The grandest staircases at Kensington are steep, carved for young men in riding boots. Anne's legs could not climb them. So Wren built a second, gentler staircase inside the palace, shallower in the step, wider in the tread, with a handrail set at a precise height for a woman who needed to take her weight on her arm. It was a small kindness carved into the building's bones. A queen too stiff to walk had a staircase built around her stiffness. She also loved the garden. She ordered the first true orangery in England to be designed for the palace grounds. It was a long, high-ceilinged building of warm red brick and tall arched windows, meant to shelter orange trees in winter and host the Queen's guests in summer. Hawksmoor drew the first plans. John Vanbrugh revised them. The orangery was finished in 1704, at a cost of around £6,000, and on warm July evenings, Anne held small parties there, oranges still in their pots, candles lit along the tables, quartets playing softly at the far end. It is strange to picture her in those rooms, a woman whose body was failing her, surrounded by the scent of citrus, laughing at a joke, reaching across the table for George's hand. It is strange because you know, as you watch her, what she is carrying. Prince George began to fail first. He had always been heavy. He had always drunk more than a doctor would recommend. Asthma, like William's, shortened his breath. In October of 1708, he died in Anne's arms at Kensington. She screamed. Witnesses said the noise could be heard through several rooms. She would not leave his body for hours. When she finally consented to be moved, she was nearly carried out, and she took to her bed for days. For the last 6 years of her reign, she lived mostly as a widow in a house that had now swallowed her sister, her brother-in-law, her husband, and all her children. She ruled through politics, through her ministers, through sheer stubborn duty. She suffered a series of small strokes. Her legs swelled, her speech slurred, her eyes dulled. Consider the scale of what this small red brick palace had absorbed by the summer of 1714. 25 years since the first workman had died beneath a collapsed wall. 2 queens dead within its rooms. 1 king dead within its rooms. 17 pregnancies lost or ended in death. 6 acres of formal gardens laid out and replanted. £60,000 spent on initial construction. Thousands more on later repairs. A single orangery raised at £6,000. 1 shallow step staircase fitted for a woman who could barely walk. All of it hidden behind the same polite red facade that welcomed visiting ambassadors to tea. Anne died on the 1st of August, 1714. She was 49. Her body by the end was so swollen that her coffin had to be built nearly square. Her physician wrote that sleep, amid the longest and sweetest she had ever known, had finally come for her. Her death did more than end a life. It ended a dynasty. The Stuart line, which had ruled England in one form or another since James I in 1603, stopped inside the walls of Kensington Palace. There was no surviving Stuart child to follow her. Parliament had already passed the Act of Settlement in 1701, which passed the crown to the Protestant House of Hanover, a German family ruling a small electorate in what is now Lower Saxony. A courier rode to the continent with the news. In Hanover, a 64-year-old German prince who barely spoke English was informed that he was now George I, King of Great Britain. The palace that had killed the Stuarts was about to open its doors to a very different kind of court. Chapter 5. Wigs, wild boys and painted courtiers. For 46 golden years, Kensington Palace glittered with Turkish valets, feral children, and fans that snapped open like switchblades. The arrival of the Hanoverians changed the tone of the house. The Stuarts had been a small, private family of sick people who mostly wanted to be left alone. The Hanoverians were something else, loud, foreign, theatrical. They came trailing mistresses and bastards and German cooks and a large, suspicious entourage who did not trust English food or English weather. George I arrived in London in September of 1714. He was a short, heavy, stubborn man, nearly bald under his enormous wig, who preferred the company of his horses and his 2 German mistresses to that of his English ministers. He spoke French at court. He spoke German in private. He spoke almost no English at all. Kensington, with its walled grounds and its quiet corridors, suited him perfectly. He decided the palace was not grand enough. He commissioned William Kent, a painter and architect only just making his name, to transform the state apartments into something that matched the new dynasty's sense of itself. Kent rose to the occasion. He was then in his mid-30s, confident, charming, a little vulgar in his tastes, and extremely skilled. Between 1722 and 1727, he tore through the interiors. His masterpiece was the cupola room. Kent painted the walls and ceiling himself in deep greens and golds, with trompe-l'oeil coffering overhead that made the room seem to rise into an Italian dome. Beneath the dome stood a gilded statue of Mars. The effect was theatrical, almost operatic. The old plain paneling was gone. Kensington was being dressed up. Then came the King's Grand Staircase. Kent covered its walls, floor to ceiling, with a vast painted crowd. 45 life-sized figures, in real court dress of the 1720s, looking down over the banisters at whoever climbed the stairs. Many of them were real members of George's household. A Polish page, a Quaker gentleman, the king's Turkish valets Mehmet and Mustafa, who had followed him from Hanover, and, set among them, a small barefoot boy with matted hair and a puzzled expression. His name, if he had one, was Peter. In the forest near Hamelin, in 1725, local people had discovered a wild boy. He walked on all fours. He could not speak. He ate grass and nuts. He was perhaps 12 years old. Sent as a curiosity to the English court in the spring of 1726, Peter became an instant sensation. Caroline of Ansbach, the Princess of Wales, took an interest in him. She was a formidable woman, sharp-minded, fluent in several languages, a patron of philosophers and doctors. She ordered Peter washed, dressed, and taught to walk upright. Her own physician, the famous Dr. Arbuthnot, tried to teach him to speak. It failed. Peter managed a few words, Peter and King George, and then fell silent again. He was given a brass collar. Around it, engraved in clear letters, were the words, "Peter the Wild Man from Hanover. Whoever will bring him to Mr. Fenn at Berkhamsted shall be paid for their trouble." It was the kind of thing a fond owner might put on a dog. he lived out his long life in the English countryside, and harmless and cared for, dying in 1785 at the age of perhaps 72. He was not the only oddity Caroline collected at Kensington. She gathered philosophers and mathematicians. She corresponded with Gottfried Leibniz. She had a menagerie of exotic birds. She held an informal political salon in her drawing room, where Robert Walpole, the first true British Prime Minister, learned to manage her husband George II by managing her. Because George II, a short, hot-tempered, brave little soldier who had become king in 1727, adored his wife and depended on her completely. They argued loudly. They reconciled loudly. He had public mistresses, and she permitted them, and he always came back to her. George I had his own private arrangement. In the north range of Kensington, tucked away behind a discreet door, he kept a secret apartment for Erengard Melusine von der Schulenburg, the Duchess of Kendal. She was tall and very thin. The English courtiers called her the Maypole. She had been with George for decades, and she was, in all but name, his wife. The palace in these years was, at a glance, its happiest. The gardens were laid out in formal parterres. The round pond was dug in the center of Kensington Gardens, covering roughly 7 acres of water. The Serpentine was created at Caroline's direct order at a cost of around £6,000 by damming the small River Westbourne. Musicians played most nights. Fans flicked open and shut in coded flirtations. Ambassadors arrived in painted coaches. And yet, beneath the gold and the laughter, the same house was still doing its work. Caroline herself died in agonizing fashion in 1737 at St. James's, not at Kensington, but only because she happened to be there when a hernia she had concealed for years finally ruptured. George II, bereft, never remarried. He returned to Kensington alone. Peter the Wild Boy grew old in his collar. The cupola room glowed. The grand staircase watched. And in the private apartments, a widowed king sat at his desk and waited, as all of them waited, for whatever the house would do next. Chapter 6. Why Won't They Come? On a cold October morning in 1760, a 76-year-old king stared from a palace window, waiting for mail that never arrived. George II was old and deaf and lonely. Caroline had been dead for 23 years. His friends had mostly followed her into the ground. He still rose early. He still kept a soldier's discipline. Every morning at 6, he washed, dressed, drank a cup of chocolate, and went to his cabinet room to read the correspondence that had come overnight from the government offices in Whitehall. On the morning of the 25th of October, 1760, no courier arrived. The king waited. He looked out of the window. The gravel drive below was empty. He muttered in German, which he still preferred when annoyed. Why won't they come? He turned from the window and walked to his private water closet. He was heard to cry out, once. The German valet on duty, a man named Schroeder, ran in and found him on the floor. The old king had struck his head against the wooden corner of the closet. Blood was on the boards. It was not the fall that killed him. Autopsy would show that his aorta, the great artery leading from the heart, had split apart inside his chest. An aortic dissection, silent and catastrophic. He was dead within minutes, almost certainly before he knew what was happening. His last words, in his first language, had been a mild complaint about the post. His grandson, George III, succeeded him. He was 22 years old. He was tall, awkward, sincere, deeply religious, and he did not like Kensington. It is hard to say exactly why. The official reason was that the palace was old-fashioned and cramped. The practical reason was that his new wife, Charlotte, preferred Buckingham House, which he bought for her in 1762. The deeper reason may have been simpler. The building had killed his grandfather in a water closet. It had a smell of old Germans and old mistresses and old griefs that he did not want around him. Whatever the cause, he made a quiet decision. He would not live at Kensington. He would not hold court there. He would not sleep there again. The consequences were immediate. State rooms that had blazed with candles every evening went dark. Kitchens that had fed hundreds scaled back to feed almost no one. The painted ceilings of William Kent began to crack quietly in the cold. Dust collected in the corners of the cupola room. The great staircase with its 45 painted figures stood in silence, its watchers watching no one. Kensington did not fall into ruin. It was too well built for that. Instead, it fell into something almost worse. It became a royal warehouse. When you are the monarch of a large country, you acquire relatives, our younger sons, spinster aunts, widowed sisters-in-law, illegitimate nephews, princes who have quarreled with their fathers, princesses who cannot be married off. These people need to live somewhere. They need roofs and rooms and a polite distance from the throne. Kensington, once the heart of English court life, became the place you sent them. The palace was subdivided. Its grand suites were carved up into smaller apartments. Numbers were assigned: apartment 1, apartment 8, apartment 10. Each was given to a royal relation, and when that relation died, reassigned to another. The rooms changed hands like theater boxes. Edward, Duke of Kent, the fourth son of George III, eventually took one. His brother Augustus, Duke of Sussex, took another, and filled it with the largest private library of any royal in the kingdom, tens of thousands of books stacked to the ceiling. Their sister Sophia, unmarried, lived quietly in a third. The Duke of Cambridge took a suite for his family. The Duchess of Gloucester took another. None of these were the center of anything. They were outposts. The real royal life had moved east to Buckingham House and Windsor. Kensington simply continued to exist the way an old aunt continues to exist, faintly complaining, rarely visited. Scale matters here. Consider the 139 years between the death of George II in 1760 and the opening of the state apartments to the public in 1899. Through almost 140 years, no reigning British monarch lived at Kensington. The palace housed at various times more than 30 minor royals. Its upkeep cost thousands of pounds a year in damp walls and leaking roofs. Vast rooms went unused. Whole wings were locked up. By the 1830s, parts of the building were so dilapidated that committees of workmen came through with clipboards, making long lists of broken sashes and rotting floorboards. And yet a darker truth sat underneath the dust. The palace had not been abandoned. It had been repurposed. The house that once held kings now held the inconvenient, the unmarriageable daughter, the profligate younger son, the widow nobody knew what to do with. Kensington had specialized in a particular kind of confinement when William bought it for his lungs. Now that confinement had simply become its official function. Somewhere in the gloomy northeast corner, inside a suite of poorly heated rooms with faded wallpaper, a middle-aged German princess had recently arrived. Her husband, the king's fourth son, was in heavy debt. She was pregnant with her first child. Her English was halting. She had brought with her, from Amerbach, a trusted Irish comptroller named Sir John Conroy. Their daughter was about to be born in a palace that had been waiting patiently for exactly this sort of arrival. Chapter 7. The Child Who Was Never Alone. A little girl was not permitted to walk down a staircase without someone holding her hand, and the system had a name. The child was Princess Alexandrina Victoria. She was born in a first-floor bedroom at Kensington Palace on the 24th of May, 1819. Her father was Edward, Duke of Kent. Her mother was Victoire, the German widowed duchess who had come to London pregnant and frightened. The birth was straightforward. The baby was small and healthy. Her father was dead within 8 months. Edward had caught a cold on a windswept beach at Sidmouth in Devon in January of 1820. Pneumonia followed. He died on the 23rd of January, 10 days before his own father, George III, followed him into the grave. A baby girl still in her cradle was now 5th in line to the British throne. Within a few years, as her royal uncles failed to produce living legitimate heirs, she became first in line. Her mother did not know quite what to do with her. The Duchess was a kind, nervous, financially anxious woman. She was deeply dependent on the advice of the man who had crossed the Channel with her, Sir John Conroy. Conroy was an Irish cavalry officer of medium build and considerable ambition. He was a handsome man, at least in the eyes of those who wanted something from him. He had been the Duke's comptroller, meaning he had managed the family's money, and he had made himself indispensable to the Duchess in the weeks around her husband's death. He now moved into Kensington with his own wife and children, taking rooms very close to those of the princess and her mother. He looked at the baby in the cradle and saw a future queen, and he devised a plan to control her. It came to be called the Kensington system. It was not one single written document. It was a web of rules, written and unwritten, which governed every hour of the princess's waking life from her earliest years until the day she inherited the throne. She slept in her mother's bedroom every single night, never alone. She was never permitted to walk down the palace stairs without someone holding her hand. She was never permitted to be in a room by herself. She was not allowed to meet most of her Hanoverian uncles without supervision. Her friendships were carefully curated and mostly limited to Conroy's own daughters, Victoire and Jane, with whom she was expected to play. Her moods were recorded daily in a small bound notebook called the Behavior Book. Good temper earned a tick. Bad temper earned a cross. The book was reviewed by her mother and by Conroy. Bad marks were discussed. Good marks were rewarded. Every laugh and every sulk was marked on paper and weighed. There were a few cracks in the wall. Her governess, Baroness Letzen, adored her and protected her when she could. Her much older half-sister, Feodora, the Duchess's daughter from an earlier marriage, visited occasionally before her own marriage took her away to Germany. Feodora later wrote to Victoria, looking back, that her own years at Kensington had been an imprisonment. She used exactly that word. The apartments themselves were gloomy. Funds were scarce. The Duchess was always in debt, partly because Conroy managed her money badly, and partly because he skimmed from it. Wallpaper was faded. Carpets were threadbare. Drafts came down the chimneys. Coal was rationed in cold weather. The first future queen of a great empire grew up in rooms that smelt of damp. She did not know she was heir to the throne, officially, until she was about 11. The story her governess told, and which she believed, was that she had opened a genealogical chart slipped into a history book and understood, slowly, what the lines of descent meant. She is said to have looked up and promised, "I will be good." Conroy watched. The older she got, the more nervous he became. She was bright. She was stubborn. She noticed things. She did not, it turned out, enjoy playing with his daughters as much as he had hoped. She disliked him. She had disliked him for years, with the quiet intensity of a child who cannot yet say so out loud. He began to push harder. He wanted her to sign a document once she came of age, appointing him her private secretary for life. That role would give him control of her correspondence, her appointments, her money, and her political decisions. In effect, he would be the real ruler of Britain behind the figurehead of a young queen. The princess watched him push. She did not argue. She simply learned, in the way that captives learn, to hide what she felt. By her mid-teens, the palace that had been built to let a king breathe had produced a different kind of prisoner. Not a dying man in a sick room, but a 15-year-old girl in a cold bedroom who was never alone, whose every mood was noted, and who was beginning, quietly and for the first time, to understand what her captors wanted from her. She understood, too, that she had only one weapon: time. If she could reach her 18th birthday before her uncle the king died, she could rule alone. If she did not, her mother would become regent, and Conroy, through her mother, would rule the country. The calendar became a weapon, and then, at the worst possible moment, she fell ill. Chapter 8. The pen she refused to sign. At Ramsgate in 1835, a 16-year-old with typhoid fever felt a pen pressed into her trembling hand. The summer of 1835 had started as a small reprieve. The Duchess had taken Victoria on one of her progresses, a tour of country houses arranged by Conroy to parade the future queen before provincial crowds. The king loathed these tours. He thought they were improper, ambitious, and vulgar, and he was right. But Conroy ignored him. The carriages rolled from estate to estate through the late summer, and by October, the party had settled in a seaside lodging at Ramsgate on the Kent coast. Victoria fell ill at the end of the month. At first, like her great-great-grandmother Mary, people thought she had a cold. Then the fever rose. Her hair fell out in handfuls. She lost weight. Her skin took on a gray tone. The doctor eventually named the disease: typhoid. For weeks, the 16-year-old girl lay in a small sea-facing room, half-conscious, her pulse uneven, her temperature dangerous. Her mother was frightened. Letson was frantic. The servants whispered in the corridors. Conroy saw an opportunity. He came to the sick room with a document and a pen. The details of the meeting come from Victoria's own account, written years later, and from Letson's memory. He leaned over the bed. He asked the fevered teenage princess to sign the paper. The paper was a letter of intent appointing him her private secretary for life, upon her accession to the throne. She was 16. She could barely sit up. Her hand shook. Her lips were cracked with fever. She refused. She turned her face away. She pushed the paper. She said no. She said it again. She would not sign it. Whatever he said, she would not sign it. Letson, watching from the corner, did not intervene in words, but the gentle governess made it clear, by her presence, that she would not leave the room. Conroy tried again over the following days. The Duchess joined him, in tears, pleading with her daughter to sign and end the quarrel. The answer remained the same. Victoria, that pale, feverish child, held out. It is difficult to overstate what this moment was. It was not a tantrum. It was not a political calculation by an experienced adult. It was the refusal of a sick teenager, surrounded by the two people who controlled every hour of her life, to hand over her future with a signature. Whatever else anyone would later say about Queen Victoria, whatever rigidity or narrowness or imperial arrogance she would display over her long reign, beneath it all sat this moment: a bed, a pen, a weak hand, a strong no. She recovered slowly. She returned to Kensington thinner, taller, more silent. Her mother noticed the change. Conroy noticed too. He treated her, from then on, with a mixture of flattery and veiled threats. She treated him with a cold civility that never cracked. Meanwhile, the old king was failing. William IV was the third son of George III, a former sailor known affectionately as the Sailor King, a kindly, blustering man with white hair and red cheeks. He had despised Conroy from the beginning. He had also noticed what was being done to his niece. At his 71st birthday dinner in August of 1836, with the Duchess and Victoria sitting at his table, the king rose and made a speech of astonishing frankness. He said loudly that he hoped he would live another 9 months so that he would not die before his niece came of age. He said that he did not trust the personage now near me, meaning the Duchess, to exercise a regency. He wanted Victoria to inherit without anyone else holding power first. It was an open, public, furious wish. The Duchess went white. Victoria began to cry. The king sat down to stunned applause from the loyal half of the table. And so, a race began. On one side of the calendar stood Victoria's 18th birthday, fixed at the 24th of May, 1837. On the other side stood the king's failing heart, his failing lungs, his swelling ankles, his doctors' worried faces. In London, and bookmakers took quiet wagers on whether he would last. The winter of 1836 to 1837 was bitter. The king caught cold after cold. He rallied in April. He weakened again in May. Victoria turned 18 on the 24th of May, 1837. There was a small celebration at Kensington. Her mother did not dare forbid it. London streets were illuminated that evening with lamps in her honor. The Duchess watched her daughter receive formal congratulations from the Lord Chamberlain and understood, perhaps for the first time, what was about to happen. The king held on for less than a month more. On the 18th of June, 1837, the anniversary of Waterloo, William lingered through the day, saying he did not want to die on that great national date. He managed it. At 2:12 in the morning of the 20th of June, with his wife Queen Adelaide holding his hand, he stopped breathing at Windsor. A carriage was ordered at once. It set out through the dark countryside towards Kensington, carrying the Archbishop of Canterbury and the Lord Chamberlain. They had one message to deliver. The old king was dead. The girl was now queen. She had won by less than 4 weeks. Chapter 9, The Dressing Gown Rebellion. At 6 in the morning on the 20th of June, 1837, a young woman came down a staircase alone for the first time in her life. The carriage from Windsor arrived at Kensington in the gray light before dawn. The porter at the gate was sleeping. He had to be woken. The horses were lathered from the road. The Archbishop of Canterbury, William Howley, and the Lord Chamberlain. The Marquis Conyngham climbed down and demanded to see the princess. There was confusion in the hall. The messengers were directed one way, then another. The Duchess's household was still asleep. Finally, word was sent upstairs, to the bedroom the young woman shared with her mother. She was to rise at once. Matters of state required her. Victoria was 18 years, 27 days old. She got out of her bed. She put on a dressing gown and slippers. She did not wake her mother. She did not ring for Letson to come and help her. She walked alone to the door. She came down the stairs on her own. The two men at the bottom looked up and saw a short young woman with loose hair, in night clothes, standing on the staircase. They bent their knees and bowed deeply. The Lord Chamberlain told her that her uncle was dead. She was now queen. Her first instinct was domestic. She held out her hand to the old archbishop. She asked him to pray with her. He did. The Lord Chamberlain knelt. The three of them remained there for a long moment, in that drafty hall, in the thin morning light, as the empire that she was about to inherit began, formally, to belong to her. What happened next, over the following hours, was not a coronation. It was something smaller, and in its way, more important. It was a quiet revolution inside one family. She issued instructions. She asked for an hour alone. She had never had an hour alone in her life. She asked for her bed to be moved out of her mother's room. That night, at Kensington, she would sleep in a bedroom of her own for the first time since infancy. She asked that Sir John Conroy not come near her, ever. He was informed, through Letson, that his services to her mother would continue if the Duchess so wished, but that he would not hold any position in the Queen's household. Not now, not ever. She called her first Privy Council for late that morning. They met in the Red Saloon at Kensington, the walls freshly hung with red damask. She walked into the room at 11, still so small that her feet did not easily touch the floor from the chair. She was surrounded by older men, generals and dukes and ministers. She read her accession speech in a clear, unbroken voice. The Duke of Wellington, who had defeated Napoleon, wrote afterwards that she had behaved as if she had been trained for the role for years. Within an hour, she had walked back to her private apartments and written in her journal, "I shall every day thank heaven for having spared me so long." She was no longer the controlled child. She was the sovereign of Great Britain and Ireland, and of an empire that was already the largest the world had ever seen. Her mother understood. The Kensington system had ended in a single morning. Within hours, the Duchess was relegated to distant apartments, physically moved further from her daughter's rooms inside the same building. Conroy, who had staked his entire adult life on controlling this girl, was finished. He never held royal office again. He would die in relative obscurity in 1854, still writing angry letters. Victoria stayed at Kensington for just over 3 weeks. On the 13th of July, 1837, she left for Buckingham Palace, which became her new official residence. She never lived at Kensington again. In the 63.5 years of her reign, she returned to it only for occasional ceremonial visits. She preferred, she said, not to think about those rooms. For the palace itself, her departure was another kind of ending. The last British monarch to have lived inside its walls in childhood walked out of its gates and did not come back. The gates closed. The dust began to settle again. Consider what the house had done in one lifetime. A widowed German duchess had arrived in 1819 with a baby and a debt. A dying princess had refused a pen at Ramsgate in 1835. A king had sworn at his dinner table in 1836 to live long enough to set her free. A behavior book had recorded 17 years of moods and misbehaviors. An Irish comptroller had tried to engineer a regency. A small woman in a dressing gown had come down a staircase, alone, before dawn, and ended all of it with a single hour of quiet speech. And the palace, once again, was returned to its older role. Through the late 1830s and 1840s, the rooms were once more subdivided into apartments. More minor royals arrived. Queen Victoria's daughter, Princess Louise, later lived in one set of rooms with her husband, and she even carved a statue of her mother, still visible today in the gardens, as if to replace, in stone, the one Victoria herself refused to give in flesh. The palace kept receiving the inconvenient and the eccentric, the widowed and the unmarried, exactly as it had done for a century. It waited. It was very good at waiting. The 20th century would bring new wars, new cameras, new kinds of royal suffering. It would also, eventually, bring one more woman for the rooms to receive. Chapter 10. The Fortress of a Lonely Princess. Nearly 3 centuries after William bought it to breathe, another resident called Kensington Palace her fortress, and meant it literally. Her name was Diana Frances Spencer. She was 20 years old in July of 1981 when she married the Prince of Wales at St. Paul's Cathedral in front of a television audience estimated at 750 million people worldwide. 3 weeks before the wedding, she had been moved into apartments 8 and 9 at Kensington Palace. The apartments were not grand in royal terms. They were a connected set of rooms on 2 floors in the northwest corner of the building. They had been the home of Princess Margaret, the Queen's sister, since the 1960s. And Margaret still lived in apartment 1A nearby. Diana's rooms were renovated between 1981 and 1987 at a cost of around £900,000. She chose soft pastels, pinks, pale yellows, blues the color of a spring sky. She ordered a children's garden laid out on a flat part of the palace roof with a sandpit, a small slide, and miniature plants for her sons William and Harry when they came. She told friends, not once but repeatedly over the years, that she thought of the building as a fortress. She said the word with a small, bitter smile. It protected her from the press. It protected her from strangers. It also, she came to realize, held her in place. For the first few years, life inside was just about bearable. William was born in June of 1982. Harry followed in September of 1984. The apartments rang with the noise of small boys. There were nannies and nursery toys and tea parties. Diana adored them. She drove them to school personally. She took them to amusement parks. She lay on the floor and wrestled them. But the marriage, everyone now knows, was failing from the beginning. She understood, almost at once, that her husband was in love with someone else, and had been for years. She understood that his family did not know what to do with her. She understood that the court around her did not quite trust her warmth, her tears, her public embraces of AIDS patients and landmine survivors. She was too modern for the machine she had married into. Her suffering became physical. She developed bulimia, which she later spoke about openly. She would eat in binges. She would make herself sick. She told interviewers later that her eating disorder had been a cry for help. At the time, inside the walls of the palace, she was alone with it. Her husband was often elsewhere. Her staff were kind, but they had their own jobs. The palace did what the palace did. It absorbed her. It kept her secrets for as long as it could. It let her pace its corridors late at night when she could not sleep. By 1995, she had decided to break the silence. She would give an interview. Not the usual, polite, pre-approved television appearance. A real interview. She chose Martin Bashir of the BBC's Panorama program. She chose her own apartments at Kensington as the location. The logistics were extraordinary. To keep the royal household from finding out, the BBC crew smuggled their cameras into the palace in hi-fi cases and cases marked as sound equipment. They set up in a sitting room overlooking the gardens. The curtains were drawn. Diana wore a dark suit and heavy eyeliner and almost no jewelry. She had been rehearsing for days. She told her private secretary she wanted to, at last, speak for herself. The interview was filmed on the 5th of November, 1995. It was broadcast on the 20th of November. In Britain, 23 million people watched live. Worldwide, audience estimates ran past 200 million. Grid engineers at the National Grid in London recorded a sudden surge when the program ended, roughly 1,000 megawatts of additional demand, as millions of households simultaneously switched on their kettles to make tea and talk about what they had just heard. She had said there were 3 of us in this marriage. She had said she wanted to be a queen of people's hearts. She had accused the royal household, without quite naming names, of conspiring against her. She had wept just a little, and she had been utterly in command. 1 month later, in December of 1995, Queen Elizabeth II wrote a private letter to her son and daughter-in-law advising them to divorce. The palace agreed. The lawyers began work. By August of 1996, Diana was no longer Her Royal Highness. She kept her apartments at Kensington. The boys kept their bedrooms, the pastel walls, the children's garden on the roof, the sense of a fortress that might no longer be needed. She began, for the first time in more than a decade, to imagine what she might become next. She had about a year. Chapter 11. 5 feet of flowers at the gate. On the night of the 5th of September, 1997, Diana's coffin returned to the building she had called home for one last night. The news had broken in the early hours of Sunday, the 31st of August. Diana had been traveling with Dodi Fayed in a black Mercedes in Paris. The car had entered the Pont de l'Alma tunnel at high speed, pursued by paparazzi on motorcycles. At 12:23 in the morning, it had struck the 13th concrete pillar at an angle. She was gravely injured. She died at Pitié-Salpêtrière Hospital at around 4 in the morning French time. She was 36 years old. Britain stopped. The reaction was unlike anything the country had seen in living memory. Streets emptied. Radio stations played quiet music. Newspapers printed their front pages almost entirely in black. And people, in the tens of thousands, began to walk towards Kensington Palace. They came with bouquets. They came with hand-lettered cards. They came with candles and stuffed toys and small photographs torn from magazines. They came alone, in couples, in families. They queued in patient lines that stretched up Kensington Church Street and around the gardens. Some stood for 4 or 5 hours, simply to reach the iron gates. By the time the flowers were finally cleared away, estimates suggested around 60 million blooms had been left there. The carpet of wrappings and petals lay 5 feet deep against the railings. Inside the palace, 136,000 people signed the official book of condolence. At night, the candles glowed like a low living field against the red brick. Diana's coffin arrived at Kensington on the evening of Friday the 5th of September. Her ex-husband, her sons, her brother, and a small royal party accompanied it. The coffin was brought through the gates past the flowers. It was placed in one of the ground floor rooms with the royal standard over it, draped in white lilies. Prince William, 15 years old, and Prince Harry, 12, spent part of that evening alone with their mother for the last time. The next morning, the 6th of September, the coffin was carried out to the gun carriage that would take it through the streets of London to Westminster Abbey. The tenor bell in the clock tower of Kensington Palace itself tolled as the procession began. A single deep note every minute across 2 miles and 2 hours of walking, heard by a silent crowd of around 1 million people lining the route. It was, in a way, the house ringing her out. The funeral was televised. Around 2 billion people around the world watched some portion of the day. Elton John sang a rewritten version of Candle in the Wind. Diana's brother gave a searing eulogy. Her body was driven north to Althorpe, the family estate, and buried on a small island in a lake. Back at Kensington, the flowers began to rot. It took weeks to remove them by lorry after lorry. The gates themselves had to be repainted. Underneath, the palace was quiet again. Her apartments were stripped. Her clothes were cataloged and archived. Her boys moved mostly to St. James's Palace with their father. The pastel walls were painted over. The children's garden on the roof was dismantled. Within a year, nothing physical of her choosing remained inside the rooms, except a few items retained for the family. For 10 years, the apartment stood empty. Occasionally, they were cleaned. Occasionally, they were aired. Otherwise, nothing happened in them. The rooms that had held her marriage, her children, her bulimia, her interview, her divorce, her hope of a new life, became simply rooms. Cold plaster, polished floors, dust gathering in the corners as it had gathered there for centuries. The palace did to her what it had done to the others. It absorbed her. It wore her like a bruise for a season, and then, with its slow, indifferent patience, it began the long process of erasing her interior and keeping its facade. Outside the gates, new visitors came each year on the anniversary of her death, leaving smaller offerings. Tourists paused on the gravel and tried to remember which window had been hers. Children born after 1997 stood in front of the building and saw only a pretty brick museum. Inside, the pattern had completed another turn. Chapter 12. The house that holds people in. Visitors today buy tickets at a door that has admitted 4 dying monarchs, 1 broken princess, and centuries of quiet, domestic ruin. Kensington Palace is now managed by Historic Royal Palaces, a charity independent of government, which also looks after the Tower of London, Hampton Court, Kew, and other historic sites. In a recent financial year, Historic Royal Palaces reported total income of around £138.6 million, most of it earned through ticket sales, retail, catering, and corporate hire. Kensington is one of its biggest draws. About 500,000 paying visitors pass through its rooms each year. The building has been carefully, expensively tended. The state apartments are open to the public. The cupola room still glows. The King's Grand Staircase still watches. The gardens are clipped. The orangery sells tea and cake. In 2011, Apartment 1A, which had been used by Princess Margaret until her death in 2002, was renovated at a reported cost of £4.5 million for William and Catherine, now Prince and Princess of Wales, and their young family. Other apartments house other senior royals. The palace still does what it has always done. It contains them. If you work there, however, you hear other things. Guides and cleaners and security officers talk, quietly, about sounds in rooms that should be empty. Footsteps on the back stairs late at night. A cold draft that moves against the direction of the wind. Doors that close a moment after you pass through them. Staff in the nursery area of one wing have reported seeing, on the edge of vision, a small, stocky figure in an old-fashioned coat, a boy with tangled hair, watching quietly from the corner of a room. Some of them identify him, half seriously, as Peter the Wild Boy. Others have spoken of a tall, thin man at the windows of the rooms once used by George II, silhouetted against an autumn sky. Of a laughter that sounds like a group of women in another century. Of the scent of roses in corridors where no roses are. Of a cold that settles into the southeast bedroom where Mary II died, and will not lift even with the radiators on. None of this has been captured on camera. None of it has been verified. Skeptics point with good reason to the long history of suggestion in very old buildings. The palace is more than 300 years old. Its floors creak on their own. Its sashes rattle. Its rooms hold memories because its visitors bring them in. Modern psychology has a phrase for it. Pareidolia, the way the human brain fills in patterns from vague sensory data. A shape in a shadow. A face in a curtain. A presence in the slight coldness of an old drafty room after dark. Given the stories told about Kensington by authors and guides and novelists for 2 centuries, it would be remarkable if staff did not sometimes feel watched. Perhaps the hauntings are real. Perhaps they are only human. The verdict, as always with this sort of house, is left open. What is not open to doubt is the pattern. Consider, one last time, the scale of what the palace has absorbed. 337 years since William bought Nottingham House to save his lungs. 60,000 pounds of original construction that killed a workman in its first year. 2 kings and 2 queens dead within its walls. 17 lost pregnancies walked off in its corridors by one childless monarch. 139 years as a decorous royal warehouse for the inconvenient. One small girl raised under a system named after the building itself. One behavior book. One pen refused at a sickbed. One night-dress staircase descent that ended the Kensington system in an hour. 1,000 megawatts of surge on the national grid when a princess spoke of her marriage. 60 million blooms piled 5 feet deep at the gate. Beside these numbers, the building looks almost humble. A handsome 3-story structure of weathered red brick. Green copper caps on its pavilions. White sash windows in neat rows. The sort of house a tourist would photograph without thinking too hard about it. And yet, stand before it. Walk its gravel paths in the long afternoon light. Look up at the plain windows of the northwest corner where Diana lived. Look along the first floor where a teenage Victoria slept beside her mother every night of her childhood. Look through the state apartments where William waited for death, where Mary burned her letters, where Anne wept over George's body, where a queen's foot learned the shallow steps Wren built for her gout. You are looking at a quiet machine. It was bought to let a king breathe. It has spent 3 centuries learning to take the air out of everyone placed inside it. It does not do this cruelly. It is not alive in any sense a scientist would accept. It simply sits, red brick and careful symmetry, and waits and receives what is sent to it. Beauty did not save William. Privilege did not save Anne. Gold did not save the Hanoverian court. Rank did not save Victoria's childhood. Global fame did not save Diana. Each of them came in believing that the walls would be theirs. Each of them found that the walls already belonged to the walls. There is a lesson in it, if you want one, although the lesson is older than Kensington and will outlast it. The human heart cannot be insulated by architecture. Suffering passes through thick brick as easily as through thin. Sometimes the very structures we build to protect ourselves become the quiet instruments of our confinement. The palace is still here. The tours run every day. The souvenir shop sells tea towels printed with its facade. Children from nearby schools file politely through the cupola room, looking up at the painted dome. And somewhere, in a small first-floor bedroom, in a corridor behind a velvet rope, in an apartment freshly painted for the next senior royal and the next after that, the house continues its work. It is very patient. It has time.